Strategic Partnerships and Development here at Mer Ranch Group. This series, for those of you who are first joining, every other week we discuss the ranch and sporting property market, buying and selling advice, and the latest best stewardship practices, as well as topics currently impacting landowners. Mer Ranch Group, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, is a full-service ranch real estate brokerage and consulting company focusing on legacy ranches and sporting and conservation properties around the West. Today, we're going to be talking about advocacy for private landowners in the West and the work of a very special organization to us, the Western Landowners Alliance. Thank you to everyone who has submitted a question. We'll try to get to them on this broadcast. Please feel free to ask your questions in the comments, and we will try to answer them as many as we can. But if we don't get them during this conversation, we will answer you directly afterward. Helping me out today is the founder of Mer Ranch Group and former board member of WLA, Ken Mer.
Well, hello, Haley, and hello, world.
Good morning. We're doing a morning broadcast today, so
Yes.
we had to figure out how to wake up and look bright and cheery.
Loving this though.
Yeah. What's that?
I love this topic. I love what Leslie's doing, so this is fun.
No, we're really excited, and WLA is a great organization. So, like you said just now, our other guest today is the executive director of Western Landowners Alliance, Lesli Allison, who's been working more than 25 years with landowners in rural communities at the intersection of conservation and agriculture. So, without further ado, here's Lesli.
Hey, everybody.
Hi there, Lesli. Thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Good morning.
It's awesome.
I know you guys have known each other for a while now. When was the first time you met Lesli, Ken?
I don't even remember what the year was. And I can talk a little bit about how I got involved later, but I remember I kind of heard about it, kind of invited myself to a meeting. I think we might have met even in Western Colorado initially, maybe.
Maybe. I remember that first meeting in Santa Fe when you came down to that first meeting. Right. Yes, 2015.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time, Lesli. I know you're very busy and you have a lot going on with WLA. So I guess we'll go right into it. A lot of those who are tuning in have probably never heard of you or don't know why you guys were created. So I'd love to know why was WLA created and what was the need?
Well, I think I'll start out by talking just a little bit about my own journey into WLA, because I think that leads to it, to answer your question. So I grew up in the West in the mountains of northern New Mexico, and I was always out on the land as a child and as a young adult. And I was exposed to a lot of things: logging, grazing, hunting, outdoor recreation, just by living where we did in this little inholding in the national forest. So I had a lot of exposure to those issues early on. But in 1996, I had this very unique opportunity to manage a large ranch in southern Colorado. And even though I'd been exposed to those Western issues, I really didn't have a background in agriculture or land stewardship. And I learned everything really on the job. And we did everything from livestock and hay production to hunting, forestry, all those things. And I was really deeply involved in every aspect of that, from running the livestock to operating the heavy equipment to building maintenance and hunt security. But we also had a very strong conservation focus with a desire to keep the land as healthy and productive as possible. So we helped restore streams and native trout populations. We implemented prescribed fire, logging to improve forest health, and we worked cooperatively with a number of public agencies. As we were doing that, I became aware of neighbors around us that were doing very similar things, but we hadn't really been talking to one another. We hadn't been coordinating across boundary lines or anything. And so I became involved with a group there of landowners and ranchers in forming the Chama Peak Land Alliance. And this was a group of us who really shared common interests, ranging from policy concerns to restoring rivers and forest health in that area. So that was sort of my first venture into what we call collaborative conservation, or producer-led collaborative conservation. It was really exciting. And it's going on today. Chama Peak Land Alliance is doing great work all the way right into the present. They've done phenomenal things for that landscape. And then in 2011, I was fortunate enough to be invited to a private lands meeting in Northwest Colorado, which ultimately led to the founding of the Western Landowners Alliance. And the people that were gathered there represented the management of about 8 million acres of public leased land and private deeded land. And they included public land ranchers and new, landowners, new buyers, people who had owned land for generations, and professional land managers and conservationists and some researchers. And we came together to explore whether there might be a need for a landowner-led voice at the intersection of agriculture and conservation. And we agreed with the interest that showed up that first day and later a gap analysis that there really was a need for that voice, that informed voice of land stewardship in the public dialogue. And so we developed our mission out of that meeting, which was to advance policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. So, in other words, we need to keep the working lands of the West whole and healthy for the benefit of people and wildlife and the ecosystems on which we all depend. And we know that the private and working lands play a really key role in that. So that's really why WLA came to be.
Yeah, because it is true. I mean, all these amazing ranchers, they live, their closest neighbor is sometimes, miles away. So to have a platform and an organization that connects all those people is really amazing. And Ken, how did you get involved? What was your first time hearing about all these guys?
First, I was just down in Pagosa Springs this last week for a Cattlemen's Land Trust meeting, and I was right near your old ranch. In fact, I was on one of the Linner ranches just over the way. So I got to see your handiwork down there. Gorgeous. I mean, that might be some of the prettiest country in the world, by the way.
It is.
Lucky you.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And so it was really fun to be down there and see some of that work that you were engaged with. I thought of you when I was there. But some time ago, I was working on a listing that we had called the J.E. Canyon Ranch in Southeast Colorado. And I met one of the, probably one of the original board members, maybe Josiah Austin. And he was assisting a client looking at this place. And he started mentioning kind of this organization and what they do. And he goes, really kind of a voice of landowners. I go, I could kind of ask more questions because I always felt that the landowners really needed a voice. I came from a public lands background as an attorney and also a lot of conservation work, working with conservation organizations and promoting conservation easements and those type of things. And realizing even a lot of those activities, nobody was really a voice of the landowner specifically. And it just struck a chord in me like, okay. And so, I kind of came from it, I guess, from that conservation standpoint. But as I start working on, these properties, you realize there's also that other, the economic aspect and the economic vitality of those ranches. And how do you connect all of these things? Because these are the folks who really run these things and make them profitable, and they work off the land. So that's even when working lands really started to become a focus of my interest in what I do, and beyond just the conservation, and how do you connect those? So that was a big draw for me. And that's really, once I met all of you and saw the diversity of people that were involved and all kind of, there for that same common goal, I was just really intrigued. I said, this is a need in the West. So I guess that's a good general explanation.
No, that's great. And I mean, as you said, these landowners and these landowners that have these working landscapes, Leslie, you've talked about it, and we talked about it a little bit before this call, but they care so deeply, but WLA fits this need that beyond caring, you need resources. So can you tell me a little about those challenges that maybe some of these ranchers have faced that you guys have helped with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the most landowners care really deeply about the land, and they are doing their best to keep it in good condition. And so I think the good news is that the land ethic is very much alive and well. But
Mhm.
it's not enough to just want to care for the land. Caring about the land and caring for it can be two really different things. And caring for land on a day-to-day basis requires, at least in my experience, three essential things. It requires knowledge and science to know what you want to do and how you want to do it. It requires resources, including money and skilled labor. And it requires a supportive public, including supportive public policies.
Mhm.
And we call those the foundations of stewardship. And often one or even all three of those foundations may be missing in a certain landscape or for a certain landowner. And another thing is that a lot of landowners are isolated from one another, and they often don't look far beyond their own boundaries. We have enough to do on our own properties. We don't need to, worry about what our neighbors are doing or three neighbors down the road are doing necessarily. Um, and yet there are really big forces at work, economic and social and environmental forces that are far beyond the control of any single landowner. And it's really only by working together that we can hope to address some of those key challenges. And those are things like critical water shortages or, the economics of working lands, which can be challenging, or
Mhm.
wildlife management, wildfire risks, those sorts of things. And many landowners today are implementing good sound stewardship practices. And I just wish more people could really understand, just how much landowners already are doing every day, how much
Right.
they're investing in things that produce enormous public benefits far beyond land boundaries, improving forest and watershed health, restoring fish and wildlife species, producing food and fiber. But again, a lot of times landowners are having to sort of invent wheels on their own, and there's not a great opportunity to share that knowledge. And we learned things that later we're able to save because we were ended up being involved with landowner alliances. We're able to save our neighbors, for example, years of having to repeat the same lessons learned, right?
Right.
We save years and expense by learning from our neighbors. If we can share knowledge more, we can really improve our collective, knowledge base and improve our stewardship much more quickly. And yet we just haven't had really sufficient forums for that. So those are just some of the few challenges. And I think we have a public that's increasingly urbanized and
Mhm.
really doesn't understand what it takes to own and manage land and provide all of these public values. Um,
So
Yeah.
true, right? I think about when I see, we talk about science and knowledge. The landowners just have this working knowledge, but it's not like, like in my previous professional law, or even, real estate, you have continuing education, right?
Mhm.
But these ranchers are so busy what they're doing, and they're not going back to college to get some of this. And this is things that you don't necessarily teach in college, because these people learn by doing, and some are successful, some aren't, but they share those stories, and being able to share those kind of experiences is really helpful.
Mhm.
Especially either the ones that don't work, but especially, then the ones that do. And how do you share that? And I thought that was a really important aspect of kind of what you guys, what WLA provides to people.
Mhm.
Yep.
And with that, I mean, that's a great segue into kind of, I think what the listeners would love to know is beyond just kind of the care and all these things, what is WLA doing to fulfill your mission of advocacy and support and knowledge for these landowners?
So, as I mentioned earlier, there are those essential things to caring for land. That's the knowledge and the resources and the support of public, and including public policy. And so, WLA really builds our programs around strengthening that foundation of stewardship for landowners in each of those
Mhm.
three areas. So, policy is a primary focus for the organization. And what we do is we make sure that people that own and manage land have a direct voice in policymaking. For example, we're working to develop economic policies and incentives that keep private and working lands whole, healthy, and financially sound. And so, to give you some examples of what that would look like, some of the hot topics, we have the Farm Bill, which is really the largest federal program addressing private lands and working lands in the country. It renews every 5 years. It's coming up for renewal in 2023. It contains key supports for both agriculture and working lands conservation. And so we'll be in the middle of those negotiations, bringing forward landowner interests to ensure those get included. Water, of course, is probably the hottest issue in the West right now. And we want to make sure that landowners have a voice in the policies that are emerging from the current crisis, and which will greatly impact water rights, water management, and just land management and ownership in general. So ensuring we have a voice in that dialogue right now is key. We have a neat initiative underway along sort of the economic lines, which is about habitat leasing. And this is an idea that would compensate landowners who are providing essential habitat for wildlife, often at the expense of their bottom line. And as an example, we have large elk populations in places like around the greater Yellowstone, actually many places throughout the West. And those elk come down in the winter, as well as other ungulates, and they spend a lot of their winter on private working lands. And when they're there, they compete with livestock for forage. They can knock down fences, take down your haystacks. They have, some detrimental effects. We enjoy them, and they also have these detrimental effects. But in some cases, there's so many of them that producers are being forced to reduce their stocking levels of livestock, which of course makes it difficult for them to stay in business. And if they can't stay in business, then often that land is sold into development, and then everybody loses what we're trying to save. So a habitat lease is designed to help close that gap when that producer is providing that kind of support for public wildlife. And we're excited that there's a key partnership between the USDA and the state of Wyoming moving forward for habitat leasing actually next week. Another issue that we're working on, as an example, is that we support the Endangered Species Act and its intent. The reasons it was created were very solid. We don't want to see the loss of species, if we can avoid that. But landowners shouldn't be penalized for doing things that support species. So if you're the one that provided a lot of habitat for an imperiled species, and then that species gets listed, you could be subject to increased regulatory oversight and land use restrictions. And so we're working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to improve landowner access to these things that we call regulatory assurance agreements. And that's basically an agreement between the service and the landowner that says, hey, landowner, if you do good things and help this species thrive, we're not going to come in and take away your livelihood. We're not going to come in and tell you can't operate on your land anymore. And so those agreements exist, but they're difficult to access, and we're trying to improve that right now.
Wow.
So there's a number of other issues, including, how we manage our federal lands, both in terms of forestry and in terms of our grazing management, that are really important to landowners because public and private lands are so interconnected and interdependent in the West. So we work on a lot of that as well.
I just wanted to make a comment. I think all of that is what's happening too, and people should know the general recognition that the work done on these private landscapes really impact what's going on all the public lands that we have out there, and vice versa. So the idea of just generally recognizing all the good work that these stewards do on the land. And I remember spending time with y'all up there, like in Cody, and doing all that research about all the ungulates, and they forage on all this private land, adjoining all this public land. Excuse me, and there has to be a recognition that there's a huge benefit of what private landowners do to, especially these wildlife habitat that's out there, and providing habitat. So I think that's great. I mean, and that was one of the other guiding things that really it got me interested in WLA too. So it's wonderful to see these habitat, plans starting to work. It's awesome.
Yeah. And it's a great point. I mean, Leslie, like you were saying, in order for these stewards to be able to be stewards, they do need the policies to back them up and the financial means and all of this support. So the fact that you guys are going behind the scenes and making that happen for everyone is amazing. So, and just the list of all the stuff you guys are working on, I'm just surprised you guys are able to sleep. Like that's a lot.
Sometimes not so much. So, the other two areas that we work in are sharing best stewardship practices, for example, that peer-to-peer education component that I mentioned earlier, and I can give you some examples of that. We do a lot, and so I won't try to cover all those bases. But for example, I think you all know that just last week, wolves killed 18 head of livestock in northern Colorado, and
Right.
a lot of angst around that happening. So one of our programs, for example, is what we call the Working Wild Challenge, and that's helping producers and partners and policymakers figure out ways to reduce the conflicts between, livestock and predators, for example, and reduce losses on both sides of that. So we have a major research project underway right now focused on identifying improving non-lethal control methods. We also do believe that selective lethal control is essential under certain circumstances and can actually improve the efficacy of the non-lethal methods. And at the same time, we have what we call the Conflict Reduction Consortium, which brings in landowners, producers, researchers, NGO groups, wildlife advocates together to really look at the big picture and figure out how we can all work together more effectively. And that's been pretty successful. I think we're about to enter our 4th year, and actually our annual conference is underway right now for the Conflict Reduction Consortium. And as another example, we have a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant working with ranchers in southeastern New Mexico to restore rangelands and lesser prairie chicken habitat. We've got a partnership with the U.S. Forest Service and livestock producers to implement joint cooperative monitoring of forest allotments. And then we, produce a whole variety of resources to just inform landowners and help connect them with science and things that they need to know about. And then finally, we have, a big focus on communications, because pretty much anywhere we go in the West, when we talk to landowners, what we hear back is, can you help us tell our story? Right? People don't understand us. We have this urbanized public. Most people have never spent time owning or managing land at all. And it takes a lot more than anyone's imagination can really contemplate. So telling the story, helping people understand our perspective is really key, and providing that voice on behalf of stewardship in the West that says landowners care about these things very much. We care about land and wildlife and clean water and all those things. How we are able to accomplish those things is very important. So we provide that voice, and we help landowners, again, share knowledge with one another. And so we have things like we produce a magazine, we have a podcast series, we have newsletters that provide news and information. We do things on social media. We conduct outreach to mainstream media to be able to, elevate that voice into the broader public.
Yeah. And like you said, too, with the communication, I mean, again, these people live in these rural places, maybe with not the best internet and all those things. So like the fact that you guys are giving them a platform to tell their story and educate their neighbors is amazing.
It's kind of why we're here today. We're just
Yeah.
trying to pay it forward, right? Just kind of, you're doing all this, making sure that people we connect with know about it.
Mhm.
And so it just kind of makes that sharing even better.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And, I think just your stories and what you guys are working on really speaks to how you differentiate. But I'd love to kind of go into how WLA differentiates with other Western wide groups out there. Ken was mentioning CCALT and some of these other great organizations. There's trade groups, there's federal and state and local groups. How does WLA differ from some of the other organizations that are out there?
Sure. Well, you have your trade organizations, which are really just that. These are organizations that are focused on promoting a particular industry or trade, for example, livestock or farming. And then there are conservation organizations and sportsmen's organizations like the National Wildlife Federation or the Nature Conservancy or Ducks Unlimited. And they all do great work, and they're really focused on, wildlife and environmental issues specifically. Then there are land trusts, which are focused on protecting private land through permanent conservation easements. And then there are what we call local collaborative or place-based organizations. These might be watershed coalitions or producer-led groups like the Malpai Borderlands or the Blackfoot Challenge. And so these are sort of local watershed scale collaborative groups that come together to work on a range of different issues with different stakeholders. But WLA is different from every one of those. We're none of those things. We're really a West-wide network of landowners. dedicated to the well-being of land and the people who steward the land. So we're really landowners who care a lot about the quality of our stewardship and the conservation and management of these lands. So it's a very unique voice. It's at a west-wide scale. We operate nationally, so we can bring the inputs from all over the place to the table and help find those paths forward. And we have, the full political spectrum in the organization. We're nonpartisan. We really do have the full extreme in the organization, but what brings us together is a real love of the land and a recognition that we have to take care of the land if it's going to take care of us. And that has to be a first premise.
That's amazing. And yeah, I don't really think there's no one like you guys out there. It's really neat to just see what you guys have become. And I know, for instance, when Ken was on the board, he going to California and going to the Tomcat and learning about soil and all these things. And, you don't necessarily think of a ranch just outside of San Francisco as, the same as a rancher out in Wyoming. But the fact that that network kind of spans across the country is cool.
Those field trips, I call them, learning trips, are so amazing. So because you can read about kind of soils and the importance, but actually when you go out to these ranches and they dig up the soil and you see it and you see the difference, that's when you go, aha. I mean, I have had so many aha moments going on some of those WLA sponsored, again, I call them field trips, but to understand what's going on is really, I mean, you have to experience it. It's, you can watch all these things on, Kissing the Ground, whatever, all these different things, but until you experience it on the ground and see it and you see the difference, it's really amazing what people can do. So anyways, kudos. I see that differentiation. I mean, I've been around, wonderful trade groups and like I said, Malpai, who are wonderful. I spoke at one of their events, and I think all of them are necessary in what they do.
Their niche. Yeah.
What WLA does is really to make that all viable, to help kind of makes everything connect. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I agree with you, Ken. I think that the getting out in the field is the best thing ever. I spend my summers touring around a lot on different ranches, meeting with landowners, seeing what they have going on. And because that's the way that our work is really informed. Our work is driven by what landowners are dealing with on the ground, what they need, what they've learned, what they know, what they're excited about. And, every landscape is completely different. Down in Southern Arizona is completely different than if you're up in, Northern Montana. The issues and landscapes can be quite different. There are common themes, of course, across all of them. But once you stand on the ground and you see it with your own eyes, you really start to get a picture you cannot possibly get in any other way. And when we started the Chama Peak Land Alliance and I just started touring neighbors' properties, I cannot believe how quickly my understanding of issues increased. It was so informative to me and so much fun.
Was that Betty down there too? Over
yeah,
gosh,
yeah.
That's why we do what we do. I mean, we love landowners and we love the stories they tell, and to see how they run their ranches, whether they're generational or new landowners. There's a stewardship component that exists throughout it. So it's neat that you guys offer this organization to advocate for those people when a lot of people don't. So, and with that, I mean, you're doing all these incredible things, behind the scenes with the policy and the stewardship and the communications and all of this. But beyond that, you guys you even have a really good resource program that exists. That's better than most. We use it all the time. Would you mind telling kind of the viewers that are out there some of the things that you guys provide for free to a lot of people who are listening?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I want to just bounce back 1 minute to the prior conversation, which is that the thing that keeps me going every day that is so exciting about this work is when you get out on the land with all these different landowners and managers, you see how many people care so deeply, are doing innovative stuff, are eager to share with one another, are curious about the land. And it really is an anecdote to all the bad news you hear every day coming out. You get out, you find out like there's tremendous good stuff happening out there. Yes, landowners need help. Yes, they need resources. Yes, we need to improve the economics. All those things are true. But to be part of a movement of landowners who are really doing everything they can to improve the West, it's just, there's really nothing like it.
Yeah.
So, to support all of that, the resources that we provide, I mentioned a few of them earlier, but for example, we have newsletters that go out so that landowners are well informed of news and events that could be impactful to them at the federal, state, and local level. And then we share, again, stewardship tips and things like that. We have a number of guides that we put out, a guide to paying for stewardship, for example. We have another landowner guide to reducing conflicts with wildlife. We have a whole series on our website that are available for download. We also are sharing resources. In other words, making sure that landowners are aware of and have access to things like federal cost share programs or state programs, technical assistance, things like that. It can be complicated to find your way through to some of those resources, and we do all we can to help landowners with that. We has, as Ken mentioned, we have this stewardship series. We get out on the land together with these stewardship tours, and that's a chance we have 40, 50, 60 landowners coming together to learn from one another. We also have our Stewardship with Vision films, in which we feature landowners who are doing different types of things. And we produce a whole number of webinars on, everything from managing drought to fire and forestry to reducing the conflicts with wildlife and so forth. So those are just some of the things we put out. And of course, we have our on-land magazine and podcast and so forth as well.
Mm-hmm. No, it's great. And I've been on a couple of your webinars, and it's neat because on some of those webinars you've had, you do have, in addition to WLA, people like yourself, a lot of different landowners on there, kind of talking their truths and their tools, and it's neat to see, and I've learned a lot on a lot of those.
Oh, by the way, shameless plug. Here's recent online magazine. By the way, great articles.
Great.
Anyways, it is fun. Go tell it on the mountain kind of thing. When you see these things, and you just get so excited. It's like, why doesn't everybody get to know these? And you do want to share them. And some people are. It's always like, when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears, kind of thing. And it's just, they haven't always been in this need or that need. But I don't care. All the landowners that I run into, and I'm like, as a sixth generation to ultra high net worth folks, they really are trying to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so you try to just impart with them that stewardship is probably the most important thing. And where do you learn some of these things? And this is where I think WLA, and I just when you have those personal experiences, when you connect to seeing how people operate on the land, and the Johnson family, for instance, even in Colorado, good friends, right? And seeing what they do, you go, oh, okay, now I understand what you're doing, be it some of the regenerative agricultural things that are happening. But it's really hard to just, you got to see it to believe it. And that's what has helped me better understand it. And I wish, it's just trying to get people to really understand that this stuff does work. And with all the news, like you said, drought and fires and things, the landowners are the ones who are kind of working on the solution to addressing these issues, really.
Well, because they can't throw up their hands and say someone else will figure it out, because it's it's their land. They gotta figure it out.
Exactly.
That's such a good point. And it's fun. I think that's the thing. Sometimes people go, oh, brother, another meeting, another thing I have to go do. But actually what you find, especially when you get out on the ground together, is it's fun. It's educational. It's exciting. And people make relationships. We have friendships that have been built over the last decade that, people all over the West now connected, that call each other up routinely with questions and consider one another friends. And it's social. And it's inspiring. And that inspiration comes at a time when it's sometimes hard to be inspired. So that's something I think people just don't really anticipate until they've experienced that.
Yeah. And we had like Ed Robertson on last week, and we were just talking about listening to each other and hearing each other's stories. And you guys are just a great platform for that. So we love what you do. and we're just excited to tell other people about it through this and some of our other things. And for those of you who are listening, I'm sure you've been intrigued by a lot of the things that we've talked about. But Leslie, how can people get involved in WLA, even if you're not a landowner? Are there ways people can be advocates for the landowner?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of ways to get involved with us. For one thing, membership is free, so you can go online. It's a simple couple clicks of a button, and you can be a member, which means you'll get our newsletters. You know, you're not going to get. We don't sell our mailing lists and things like that, so we respect your privacy, but we provide you relevant information. And of course, we hope people will support us financially because we can't do this for free. So, you know, those that can support us, we really, really appreciate that contribution. You can always reach out to our staff to let us know your interests, your concerns, and questions. You can attend events, host a field visit on your own ranch, for example. Those are all, you know, ways to be involved with us. And the easiest way to find us is really on our website, which is westernlandowners.org.
Mhm.
And all of our contact information from the different staff is on the website under the staff page. So you can contact us that way directly. So yeah.
And what does what does membership offer once you become a member? All the webinars, all the things, some of those trips that Ken was talking about.
Yeah, so you get, you know, newsletters that others don't get. For example, members only newsletters. We have sort of members only invitations to certain events. We reach out to our members when there are things that are happening in your landscape. So, for example, if there's some kind of state policy thing that's come up that's going to affect landowners in some way, we'll email out, you know, alerts and notices to you so you can stay on top of that. And join us if you wish on advocacy on whatever it is. So you're really just kind of in the loop. We'll keep you in the loop on things that are going to affect you every day, and then you get some opportunities to participate in these special events.
That's
And then, of
awesome.
course, you get our magazine on land for, you know, at $30 membership and up. People get the on land printed magazine as well.
Mhm. And we
Yeah,
love it. I mean, some of my favorite stories are in there, so definitely worth it.
well, I
Great.
think as you look at this, you know, there's a lot of groups that conserve some of the land, but you're here conserving, you know, really, it's not just a lifestyle. It's the working land and that interrelationship between the water, you know, and some of the habitat. Because ergo that goes, you know, some of those things, there goes the West. So
Mhm.
you got to kind of, there's different ways of supporting. You're not going to protect everything, but you got to, you know, and I get all the conservation work and all that, but different strokes for different folks, and not everybody does that. But in the end, it's how you manage the land that's the
Mhm.
most important. It's not about always just preventing development. It's kind of how do we give people greater understanding of how to manage and be good stewards as we continue to confront different issues that affect, you know, from weather and climate to you know, wolves and all the
Mhm.
different things that have this interrelationship, because it's glue that keeps it all together are these private working landscapes in my view, and that's just the goal of
Mhm.
mine, you see, and that's really, again, one of the reasons I got involved. So kudos to Western Landowners and you and everybody out there that
Well,
are
thank
working.
you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ken, and thank you all at Mer Ranch Group. You guys have been tremendous supporters all the way through. Ken, your participation on the board has been phenomenal and valuable to us, and your continued support in so many different ways. We really appreciate it. You know, your clear interest in land really goes directly to what we care about, right? The health, the success of these places is so important, and that's evident in all that you do. So thank you guys.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
We're appreciative, and we're so appreciative that you came on with us today, Leslie. We love what you guys are doing. We believe in what you guys are doing, and we just wanted to give you all a voice to our platform too. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Really appreciate it. You guys have a great one.
You
Thanks,
too.
Leslie.
And thanks,
Bye.
Ken. See
Bye.
you guys. And thank you for all of you who have joined. Today, we thank Lesli and Western Landowners Alliance for everything you do. If you'd like to know more about what they're doing and to join their membership, go to their website at westernlandowners.org and become a member because it's free. And who doesn't love free? And become a part of their community and join the conversation. And if you want to learn more about ranch news and some of our other opportunities at Mer Ranch Group, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website at www.merranchgroup.com or give us a call at 303-623-4545. Thanks for joining. See you next time.